the Nintendo Game Boy, a product so iconic that it literally defined the category of mobile gaming. As a kid, I loved my Game Boy. It was the only thing that stood between me and sheer and utter boredom on long road trips with my parents. Alas, playing one today is a bit of a rough experience. It's got a screen that's barely legible in a lot of conditions, it runs on disposable batteries, it's a chonky boy, and in general, it just falls short of how glorious I remember it being. So today, I would like to modernize the Game Boy for 2024. The first step of this project is going to be identifying a donor. Original Game Boys are quickly becoming a bit of a collector's item, so I'm actually going to keep that one as is, and for this project, I'm going to use a Game Boy Advanced SP. These consoles were released in 2003 and sought to fix a lot of the problems that I outlined with the original Game Boy. They had internal rechargeable batteries, backlit screens, and a much smaller form factor. Unfortunately, they were only updated to 2003 standards, which today is not very impressive. The real reason that I wanted to start with the Game Boy Advance SP is because it's a great platform for modding and it has full backwards compatibility with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, something that Nintendo actually removed from all future versions of the Game Boy. And the way the SP does it is actually really cool. The CPU at its core is essentially a beefed up and upgraded version of the original Game Boy's processor. That means it can run all the original games without any of the traditional emulation compromises. That being said, despite being almost 15 years newer than the original Game Boy, both the screen and the speaker on the SP are really starting to show their age. Plus, being that it's over 2 decades old at this point, it's long overdue for some basic maintenance. So, during this project, we're going to address all of those issues, plus a heck of a lot more. So now that we've gotten this thing all broken down, the next thing that I want to do is get really well acquainted with all of these parts and build an entirely new case for the system. Truth be told, I was never a huge fan of the clamshell design of the SP, nor the horizontal design of the other Game Boy Advances. So for this build, I want to convert this thing back to the candy bar form factor of the original Game Boy. Pretty quickly, I realized that the hardest part of this project was going to be its scale. Many of these measurements needed to be accurate down to a fraction of a millimeter, and even small errors could have serious consequences. Creating this model gave me an entirely new appreciation for the skills and knowledge that the original designers must have had. I started by measuring all of the individual components like the motherboard and its ports. The original case also served as a great reference to double check my work. That being said, I was changing the form factor, so there was only so much that I could copy. A lot of stuff had to be completely re-engineered. Probably the most difficult of which was creating enough clearance behind the screen so that I could still plug in that giant proprietary charging port. But don't worry, we're gonna fix that. Okay, so it took me many hours of modeling and more prototypes than I care to count, but I think I've finally got the first version of this design finalized and ready to print. So let's do that and see if everything fits. One of the things I regret not buying sooner are these textured build plates for my 3D printers. They completely eliminate the need for applying glue stick before your prints, and as you'll see in a second, they also give you a much nicer surface texture. After a couple of hours of printing, I finally had my new case, and I think, as you can see from my response here, I was pretty excited about it. Oh boy, it's ready, it's ready, it's ready. Oh yeah, look at that. After working on a digital version of this case for so long, finally seeing it all come together was super satisfying. One goal I set myself for this phase of the project is that it can't require any new parts. So all these little screws and springs you see me using come directly from the original Game Boy SP. That way it's a nice, easy mod that anybody can do at home without needing to buy any additional parts. So there we go, we finally have a candy bar style Game Boy Advance. To me, this is just such a nostalgic form factor. Something about it just feels right in the hand. But obviously, this is not the final form of this project. I'm actually going to do this in 2 stages, easy mode and hard mode, if you will. If you want to follow along at home, you can download my STL files. There'll be a link in the video description, print your own candy bar style case, and then transplant the hardware from a Game Boy SP into it. Without the need for any soldering skills, you'll have a great way to enjoy all of your favorite retro Game Boy games in what I think is a much better form factor. But what if price was no object? What if you wanted to create the ultimate Game Boy, but didn't mind buying a few new parts? Because inside this box, I have a plethora of upgrades, and they range from simple cosmetic mods to parts that will fundamentally change the way this system works. And the really cool thing is, once we get them installed, we'll be able to redesign this case and make it even better. Just like in a video game, playing on hard mode is going to require some additional skills, and for a lot of these mods, you'll need to know your way around a soldering iron. That being said, it's really not that bad, and I've got some tools and tips to share that will make it a lot easier. The first one is to just grab yourself a simple parts holder. It'll keep whatever you're working on safely anchored in place so that both of your hands are free to work. I'll include a link for this one along with all the other tools and materials I've used down in the video description. The first thing I did was start removing all the components that we're going to be replacing. The shoulder buttons on the SP are really mushy and soft feeling, so those were my first victims. To remove them, I'm using a solder wick, which is just braided copper wire. Solder loves copper, so as long as you heat it up and add a little bit of flux, the wick should suck it all up. And that solder was the only thing holding those shoulder buttons in place, so after it was removed, they just popped right out. Both the charging port and the link port were next. By removing and replacing them, I'll be able to make my new Game Boy thinner and more convenient to use, which we'll talk more about in a second, but first I wanted to take care of some long overdue maintenance. This capacitor right here is a very common failure point. It has a tendency to leak and dry out with age, which then renders the Game Boy useless. And I also removed this power switch, which will eventually wear out as well. Another important soldering tip is that it's always a good idea to remove any leftover flux with some rubbing alcohol. Not only is it sticky and gross, but some fluxes can corrode contacts and traces over time. And while you're at it, you might as well remove the serial number from your Game Boy so that it can't be traced back to you if it's ever used for any future crimes. Now let's talk about the new parts. To upgrade the shoulder button feel, I grabbed these much clickier switches from a regular Game Boy Advance. I thought this installation was going to be super simple, but turns out they're just a little bit longer than the SP switches, so I had to file them down before they would fit properly. Then it was time for the first truly modern upgrade. I replaced the original proprietary charging port with this USB-C adapter. The neat thing about the original charger is that it works on a 5-volt architecture, and so does the USB standard. So this adapter is literally just remapping the original pins to the pins inside of a USB-C port. Not only will this allow me to charge the Game Boy with the same charger I use for all my other devices, but it will also allow me to pipe audio out of the same port. That means I can use USB-C headphones instead of the proprietary ones that Nintendo doesn't even make anymore. And all of that would have been great, but unfortunately there was a little bit of an accident during installation. So I made a little bit of a boo-boo when I was installing the USB-C port, and I ended up tearing off one of the pads. I thought I ruined this motherboard, but as it turns out, it's not actually that big of a deal to fix. So what I did was I ran a wire from that pad to this contact over here on the other side of the motherboard, and that's the same wire that would have been in the PCB, so that fixed it. So I was able to move on from there, thankfully. As for the link port, I opted not to reinstall it. Honestly, I know I'm not going to be trading Pokemon anytime soon, and its absence will allow me to shrink the thickness of the Game Boy. A brand new capacitor got installed in the place of the old one, and I paid careful attention to its orientation because it won't work if you install it the wrong way around. One funny thing I noticed about my replacement power switch is its notchy, clicky feel. The original one was a smooth linear switch, and I'm not sure if that's because it was worn out, but either way, this new one should provide many years of trouble-free operation. Next, it was time to fix a problem that I hadn't even created yet. This flexible PCB is a power cleaner, and it smooths out the power delivery to your Game Boy, which then, in turn, eliminates any hum and feedback you might have from your speakers. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, hey, my Game Boy doesn't hum or hiss, and usually they don't, but once you start adding mods that consume more power, like this RGB backlighting kit, it can often be an issue. This flexible PCB adds tiny little LEDs underneath each of your buttons. Each one is individually addressable, makes the system more usable at night, and makes the whole system just look kind of cool. Finally, it was time for what I think is going to be the most impactful mod of them all, a brand new IPS screen. It's higher resolution, brighter, has better viewing angles, and importantly for me, is quite a bit thinner than the stock screen. The only downside is that it doesn't fit inside of my new case, so I had to test everything in a disassembled state. And man, what a result. This new screen is amazing, and we'll go more in depth on it later, but before we do that, let me show you some of my upcoming projects thanks to the sponsor of today's video. Aura frames. They make the best digital picture frames that I have ever seen. We're talking high resolution, low reflectivity, and they look great from every angle, which you definitely can't say about the Game Boy screen. But it's even more important when you're talking about a digital picture frame because you want this thing to look good even when you're looking at it from across the room. I've got this one here loaded up with behind the scenes sneak peeks of my upcoming projects. And get this, you can even load videos onto your Aura frame because, let's face it, not all of your favorite memories are going to be captured in photo form. It's super easy to set up and their app is even easier to use. You can invite your friends and family to share photos to your Aura, or you can give one as a gift and use it as a way to share photos with them. To get your own Aura frame, check out the link down in the video description and use code ZachBuilds to save $35 off their best-selling Carver matte frame. Plus, you even get free shipping. All right, now let's get back to this Game Boy build where we're gonna take things to the next level. All right, so that is the first round of mods installed. I still have a couple more that I'll show you guys later, but before we do that, now that we have the new screen and the USB-C port installed, we can redesign our case and make it even better. And one of the key things that I wanna focus on is making it even more compact and a little bit more ergonomic. One of the primary reasons I was so excited about the new USB-C port and the thinner screen is that they both allowed me to set the motherboard lower inside of the case. Not only did this make the Game Boy 10 to 15% thinner, but it also allowed me to reduce the insets on the front face around the buttons. And on top of that, the new screen also has smaller bezels, so I was able to move the screen down closer to the controls and reduce the system's overall height. The whole package now just looks a little bit sleeker and I think will feel much better in the hand. But I guess we won't really know until we print it out. For this round of printing, I actually made the case in two different materials. The first one is your standard black PLA. Nothing too exciting here, but it is a nice, strong, and rigid plastic. That being said, it's not my favorite for electronics enclosures because it gets pretty soft at a relatively low temperature, and for this project, it also ruined some of the work I did before. Oh man, I know it's only like a few millimeters difference in terms of height and the thickness is not even that, but this just feels a lot better in the hand than the old one did. But the black PLA, it's just not really doing it for me because, well, not only does it just look kind of plain, but also you can't even see the backlights on the buttons with this case. So I decided to try something that sounds like it shouldn't be possible. I also printed the case in clear polycarbonate. Now, I've done clear 3D printed parts before using my resin 3D printer, but I've never seen a clear part printed with an FDM printer. This stuff should be really strong and heat resistant, but I'm curious to see what it'll actually look like once it's done printing. While we wait for that to finish, I decided to make some lemonade out of lemons. After repeatedly test fitting the Game Boy speaker into a bunch of different prototypes, I accidentally broke its flexible contacts. But while I was searching for a replacement, I learned that there are upgraded speakers you can buy. So I ordered one of those and a beefed up amp to power it. Installing the amp was a bit tricky as it connects to some contacts that are underneath the LED backlight that I installed earlier, and to make matters worse, once it's installed, it's going to block one of the contacts that powers the backlights. So I soldered this little wire to the contact and looped it around. Not only will this amp make the speaker louder, but when combined with the new speaker, it should sound much fuller and much less like a tinny little Game Boy speaker. Once the amp was soldered in place, I folded the LED backlights back down and connected that wire from before. We'll do a side-by-side comparison of both speakers a little later in the video, but at that point, my clear case had just finished printing and I was very eager to see the results. It's ready. Yes. Look at this. Cool. What do you think, Bing? And you know what? I actually kind of like the way the clear polycarbonate looks. It's definitely not crystal clear, but if you squint, it almost looks like that transparent plastic they used for some of the old Game Boy Colors and Game Boy Advances. To go along with the new case, I also installed a fresh set of silicone pads and some black buttons, which I think look a lot sharper than the original gray ones do. And I also snuck in a functional upgrade. This is a 900 milliamp hour battery, which is about 50% larger and 2 decades newer than the original cell. Even with a higher power drain of our new backlight and screen, this should provide much longer playtimes. So there we go. Our machine is assembled and this thing is ready to rock. But if I'm being completely honest with you guys, this is not what I intended to create. I wanted to make something that was clear, and this is more of a frost white. Now, in my previous videos, I've shown you how you can achieve a clearer look through post-processing, but it's really labor intensive and honestly not a lot of fun to do. So I would rather outsource it. There are a few companies out there that will take your 3D print files, print them out for you, handle all the post-processing, and then put the finished parts in the mail for you. I've never actually done this before, so I'm curious to see A, how long it'll take, B, how good the parts are, and then importantly, C, how much will it cost. So I loaded up my browser and went to both JLC 3DP and PCBWay.com. The experience on both sites was basically identical. I loaded up my 3D models and then selected the materials and finishes that I wanted. They both used different resins, but the sample images provided for both looked about the same. Now, JLC 3DP ended up being significantly cheaper, but the cheapest option isn't always the best. After you submit your order, the models are then reviewed by a human for feasibility, and both services came back to me and said my models were high risk and might not be printable. I was feeling lucky though, so I said go ahead and print them anyways, and then just let me know if something goes catastrophically wrong. And after that, I didn't hear anything else, so for the next couple of weeks, I stayed glued to my front window watching the mailbox. And then finally, they came. So we have PCBWay in the white, JLC 3DP in the blue, and I guess we're gonna unbox them and see who did it better. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, PCBWay has sponsored a video from me in the past, but I currently have no working relationship with them. And similarly, JLC 3DP has approached me about potentially sponsoring a video, though nothing ever came of it. Unboxing these parts was a pleasant surprise. Like I said earlier, both services warned me that some of the walls of my parts were too thin and might get damaged during post-processing. But I'm happy to report that everything looked great. So if you're planning on ordering any of your own parts, just know that both these companies are pretty conservative when it comes to evaluating printability. And so now, the only real question left is, who did it better? Okay, so my immediate impressions are that both of these are remarkably similar, and honestly, I think if you're gonna order parts, you can't really go wrong ordering from either one. However, there are a couple of differences that I'm noticing right off the bat. This is the PCBWay part, and one thing that I like about it is that it feels a lot more rigid and solid than the JLC 3DP part. This one is just kind of soft and gummy-like. I don't know how to describe it other than that it's just quite a bit softer. That being said, the post-processing on this part is significantly better. I can see a lot more 3D printing artifacts on this, and also I think there's like sanding marks and a little bit of residue from the finishing process on this. Overall, I think just because of the added rigidity, I'm gonna go with the PCBWay part for my final assembly, but again, I don't think you could really go wrong with either. Getting parts professionally 3D printed like this is an absolute game changer. Sure, it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but when you compare it to the materials and the amount of time that it would take to post-process my own 3D prints, it starts to look like a downright bargain. Plus, it opens up my designs for all of you guys at home who don't have 3D printers, but still want to get in on the fun. Oh man, that looks so good. Now, before we get into the final testing, I've got one last feature that I want to add. Modern game consoles all have built-in storage so that you can download games from the internet and then not have to switch discs or cartridges in order to play other games. That same storage also allows you to save right onto the system. It's really convenient and something I've grown to expect from basically every system at this point. Obviously, the Game Boy predates that kind of technology by several decades. But what if I told you that there was a way that we could add all of that functionality and more with a little piece of hardware? This is the Easy Flash Omega. And with it, we can load every single Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance game onto a single cartridge. In this slot, we can drop in a 128 gigabyte SD card, and on that, you can load as many ROMs as your heart desires. Honestly, the games are so small that it might as well be unlimited storage. Once you boot your device, you're greeted by this fun screen here where you can pick from all of your favorite games. Now, obviously, it's still illegal to download games that you don't actually own, but this is a great way that you can play all of your legal backups. But wait, there's more. You can also run cheats and community modified versions of games. There's support for save states, saving to the SD card, basically instant loading times, and for the extremely limited number of games that actually supported it, there's rumble functionality. Oh, and it'll even emulate NES games too. It is a bit pricey, but it's a huge upgrade and makes this system a lot more modern. And I guess that's as good a point as any to show off all the cool things that this upgraded screen can do. Instead of just one level of brightness like the old screen had, this new one has 8 different levels that you can cycle through by pressing this button. This thing gets seriously bright, which makes it infinitely more usable. And it also gets pretty dim too, which is great for playing at night without searing your eyes. If you hold down the brightness button, you can actually bring up this menu here, which lets you cycle through various screen modes, including this one that does a great job of emulating the original Game Boy's color palette. But you know, you can actually see it. And if you want, there's even a couple of fake scanline modes too. This last setting here is probably beyond the scope of this video, but it basically toggles how the screen handles transparency. The original Game Boy never officially supported transparency, and the devs had to do it in a really hacky way that doesn't work well on modern screens, so that setting there fixes it. The new speaker is also way louder and much clearer. Here's a quick sample comparing the two. Honestly, it's so loud, I wish the volume slider was larger so that I could have more granular control over it. I can't just throw it at max volume and then call it a day anymore. Then if we turn our attention to the case, well, they not only look awesome, but they also feel awesome in the hand. Both manufacturers did a fantastic job of post-processing, and you really can't feel any defects or issues with them at all. Being able to see all of the internal workings of the device is super cool, and these cases are crystal clear compared to the old ones that Nintendo used to make, where they were a little bit more frosted looking. I think the ergonomics are great too. I could play this thing for hours without any issue. So that's all of the good stuff, and now let's talk about the bad during the post-mortem analysis. And honestly, I don't really have a lot to say here. I tried really hard to make this the definitive version of the Game Boy. That said, one feature that I ended up cutting was the addition of a wireless charging coil. I couldn't find one that would fit in the back of the device without making the whole system a lot thicker. But if I could have found a small enough coil, it would certainly be possible. Oh, and I also saw someone recently release an OLED screen mod for the Game Boy Color, which I think would have been really cool to add to this, but as of yet, nobody's released one for the Game Boy Advance. All right, everybody, that's it for me. Check out the 3D print files down in the video description. I'll just bundle both versions together, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.